Hello everyone, this is going to be part 2 in my standard account building and drafting guide. I've used this part of my own guide basically to climb to top 100, and we're still going. This part's going to be all about cleaving, right? So once your account is a bit more established and you're actually fast on your damage dealers and your speed contest, you got everybody ready to go. This is how you're going to want to draft, for the most part, to be able to cleave anybody. I've got some slides prepared this time around again, but before I get into that, this video took a lot of time and effort to make, so I'd really appreciate it if you find some value in this, maybe a like, maybe subscribe for part 3, and we'll get right into it. In the interest of making this guide a bit more future-proof, rather than saying, this is the game of rock, paper, scissors we're playing, pick Heinrich to counter this, pick Messiah to counter that. I'd like to go a bit more in depth into the actual concepts behind drafting so that you can apply this to any meta, current or future. Right? We've got a balance patch coming up soon with Season SS3 starting and future releases. So this should help you build your account and draft against whatever the meta may hold in the future as well. So I call these the key concepts for drafting cleave. Right? You've got understanding the 5 main roles. Right? This will come in handy during your drafts. I'll give some example drafts to dissect what we learned here. Right, the 3 big cleave archetypes. Right, speed tuning, which is very important. Get into the math behind some of that, as well as some little-known mechanics. Slide should be pretty self-explanatory. Some example drafts with everything we learned here in mind, and some mystery bonus tips thrown in between. So, the 5 main roles, as I like to break them down into, is your initiator or opener, the bridge to pair with your initiator, the damage dealer, the sustain, and the utility. First off, we've got the initiator/opener. These are characters that can ensure your key units go first, your whole team goes first, or otherwise convert your speed rolls into an overwhelming advantage. Freya, with her passive here, if you put her on Bulwark, she is the fastest character in the game. As long as you build her relatively fast, 330 to like 345 speed. Right, 345 should be fast enough to outspeed everyone. So she makes sure your team goes first. Durandot, with this massive turn meter push on the skill 3, will make sure your whole team goes first, which is very strong. In my opinion, the strongest opener in the game. Right, Freya is a bit of an initiator and a bit of an opener combined, and Plume is much more of an initiator. She's the convert your speed rolls into an advantage in this example, right? So what Plume would do as an initiator is, for instance, against an opponent team with lots of defense scalers and no cleanse. If your Plume is fast enough to go first, and she hits this skill 3, putting weakness and defense down, their team is going to do basically no damage to you for the first 2 turns, which in my book is an overwhelming advantage. Right, so initiators, for the most part, are characters that don't necessarily guarantee you turn 1 for your entire team, but they don't really need to because they continue providing lots of value throughout the fight, whereas openers really need to be turn 1. So I think a great example would be Nahor and Tsukiyomi. Nahor can start the fight off and freeze and defense down. The skill 2 can strip buffs and freeze single target, and then he can freeze again the turn after if he's on Codex, and provide lots of value for quite a few turns. Maybe not quite as much value on the first turn as someone like Suki, but he has the added advantage of not necessarily needing to go first in order to have any impact at all. Suki, on the other hand, is very strong on that first turn, right? If you can bring up your super slow, ultra high damage P5 Messiah and just one-shot their team, that's pretty good. But after that first turn, she doesn't really do a whole lot, and if she doesn't get the first turn, right, if you get outsped, once again, she doesn't do a whole lot. So I think that's the main difference between an opener and an initiator. Initiators can be openers, but typically they also have to have some sort of value generation throughout the fight over multiple turns, right? So like Freya, with all the turn meter boost and pushback and buffs, as well as starting off the fight right at the front of the line to combo with your bridges, making her a solid opener as well. So next up, you have the speed bridge. These are characters that can bridge the gap between your fast openers and slow damage dealers, or prevent the opponent's key units from going before your slow damage dealers. So Beonten, great example of this. She is pretty slow, right? Her base speed is, I believe, 118, so you're not going to be able to build her as an opener. But what you can do is build her around 330 speed, paired with Freya. You hit the Freya skill 2, which boosts your Beonten to the front, and then you use this huge turn meter push to bring your Messiah or Yeli or whoever your damage dealer is all the way to the front and one-shot people. Senyu is a great speed bridge with Freya. Right? Freya's the fastest character in the game, so it makes sense to pair Senyu with her as the fastest damage dealer in the game. She gives an extra 2 buffs, right? Which with Freya's passive, if you skill 2 and then Senyu skill 3, that's enough to push basically any 300 speed unit on your team all the way to the front with these two combined. Right? And then Mio can skill 3 or skill 2 to either steal the opponent's turn meter, bring your team up to the front, or freezing the opponent. They take their turn, they're frozen, they can't do anything, and then your damage dealer gets to go. Now, Mio can also be an initiator or an opener, but in my opinion, she works better in CC teams if she's a bit slower, in the 320 to 330 speed range. And if she can go after your buff strips, I think she works better in CC. That's the speed bridge. Next up, we have the damage dealer. Right? These are characters that can deal enough damage in combination with the rest of your team to defeat the opposing team. So Messiah, right? Very simple example of a damage dealer. Boost him up with your opener and your speed bridge. He hits the S3 and ideally one-shots the entire enemy team. Pretty simple, right? Raymary is a very strong damage dealer because let's say your Messiah doesn't do enough damage to one-shot the enemy team. Raymary's passive kicks in. She hits the S3, ideally steals enough turn meter to get to the front, and then she gets to hit it again, which is pretty strong. And then Plume. And you might think, well, Plume isn't a damage dealer. Well, it's true, she isn't a DPS, she is still a damage dealer, right, in combination with the rest of your team. In a CC team, this passive, right, stacking up 10 quills, making your opponent take 60% more damage, as well as the defense down, makes her and the rest of your team do significant amounts of damage. Your small, 1,200, 2,000 damage chips turn into 4,000 or 5,000 damage chips. So on a CC team, Plume is effectively your damage dealer. Next up, we've got Sustain. These are characters that can keep your team alive long enough by healing, shielding, or damage reduction for the team to achieve victory. These don't have to be characters that keep you alive forever. This can be something like Deeding on a CC team, giving you the Sanctolin, which gives you just enough sustain to tank one Raymary S3, which typically is enough for your CC team to achieve victory. Right? You can have characters like Fia, who do tons of healing and tons of cleansing, right? Cleansing off debuffs that make you take more damage, believe it or not, makes you take less damage. And you've got characters like Fushu, who just do ridiculous amounts of healing, thus sustaining your team. And lastly, you've got Utility. These are characters that can counter specific characters of the other 4 roles, counter entire roles and or each other. Right, great example of that is Heinrich counters Silence, even though they are both utility units. And funnily enough, because Heinrich's buff strip is part of his passive, Silence actually also counters Heinrich. They can counter specific shells or otherwise aid your team in ways that don't fit into the other 4 roles. Alright, so Santic I think is the best example of these two. His skill 3 gives you a crit damage buff, which makes you do a lot more damage. But unlike Plume, he can't really be your damage dealer on the team. So he doesn't fit into that role particularly. And his skill 2, increasing the enemy's cooldowns, counters Amber incredibly well. And just kind of everything in general, as long as this actually lands, right? Not having your cooldowns is pretty bad. And then Heinrich counters basically the entirety of the sustain role. His skill 3 prevents buffs with his buff block. Last words stacks, which stack up to 4 times. Each count as debuffs that need to be cleansed individually, right? So he shuts off a lot of cleansing, right? Unless you're Fia or Doki who cleanse all. And then Wound shuts off healing. So no buffs to decrease your damage taken. No shields, and no healing. He counters Sustain pretty much on his own. And then Silence counters specific characters who heavily rely on their passives. So there are a lot of characters that fit into this utility role that don't quite fit into the other 4, but they're still incredibly useful for your team. With that in mind, you can think of it like a bit of a game of rock, paper, scissors. Sustain counters your damage dealers counter utility, utility counters sustain, for the most part. So you can apply that to your drafts like so. So in this game against Testament, I got first pick. So I took Raymary, of course, right? I believe she is still the strongest first pick in the game. Most characters fit into more than just one role, right? And depending on their builds, you can add additional as well, right? So for instance, if you put Amber on somebody, that automatically makes them like a pseudo-sustain. Because as we discussed here, all you need is for them to keep your team alive long enough to achieve victory. That does not necessarily mean they have to be able to heal you a bunch. And so Amber oftentimes is enough sustain if you have one or two of them. So Raymary is a damage dealer, pseudo sustain, but also a bit of utility with her vulnerability debuffs, which makes enemies receive 30% more damage. So very strong character. Pretty much all of the strongest characters in the game fit at least 3 roles, or they fit 1 role incredibly well. So I first pick Raymary. He goes with 2 sustains, right? And so I take Senyu and Turandot. Now, one key concept to keep in mind in pretty much any draft is that you want to remain as neutral as possible. If you are first pick, you want that neutrality to extend all the way until your 3rd character. Your 2nd pick, you want your first 2 to be neutral, right? And what do I mean by neutral? Well, you want to draft in a way that lets you pivot on 4-5, or if your 2nd pick on 3-4-5, into anything that counters your opponent's team. And so here, this is a fairly neutral opener, right? You've got Raymary, who you can build any team with a Raymary first pick. You've got Senyu, who is a damage dealer and a buff stripper, right? So she's got damage and utility. And you've got Turandot, who is not as neutral. Openers benefit damage dealers a lot more than they benefit utility characters. So Turandot does skew the draft a bit more in the cleave direction and a bit away from the CC direction, but she's still neutral enough, right? And then my opponent picks a utility on lock and then another pseudo sustain. So I have a couple choices to make here. Do I go with utility characters to counter all the sustain, or do I go with damage dealers to just nuke them? Now, Doki basically shuts you out of most, if not all, utility, right? Basically only Santic is good against Doki, especially with Fiamelia on the board. None of your debuffs are going to stick. However, Doki being almost entirely utility, she's very weak to just damage, right? And with Turandot boosting your whole team to the front, if someone locks Doki on 3, it makes a lot of sense to just go full damage. Then he picks a utility on 5. Plume on this team, her only purpose here is to hopefully push the Doki ahead of at least one of my damage dealers so that he can push his Fushu up and get the healing off, right? Because once again, sustain counters damage dealers if they can actually take their turn, right? Which is why we banned the Fiamelia, because she always takes her turn, because that's part of her passive, unless your Messiah is speed tuned ahead because his skill 3 ignores passives. So we have a team with 4 damage dealers and an opener versus a team with 2 sustains, a pseudo sustain, and 2 utility. And so we ended up winning. Next, first pick again, I take Raymary. He goes with a damage dealer, pseudo sustain, and sustain. And I rather foolishly bring my own sustain utility and an opener. This is not very neutral, right? This basically locks me into cleave, right? Which allows him to simply go with 3 more sustain units. And then when I try and cleave, it does not work out because he just has too much healing. Another game where I once again did not remain neutral enough, right? Except this time he's first strike. So he takes Raymary because Raymary is the strongest first pick in the game. And I go with Loan and Fiamelia, which is a fairly neutral one too. Off of this opener, you can pivot CC, you can go cleave, you can go turn 2, all kinds of stuff. All right, so then he takes Tiamat and Plume. He has 2 damage dealer pseudo sustains and a utility. So off of these first 3 picks, it should have become pretty clear to me that the last 2 picks would be 2 healers, right? So when I was picking my 3-4, I could have kept in mind that his last 2 picks would be healers, and that Turandot plus 1 damage dealer and these 2 would not be enough damage to kill through 2 healers. So I made a mistake in my draft here by not correctly assessing that the last 2 picks would be sustains, and that utility would be really strong here. Once again, I think this exact same draft, except with Heinrich here instead of Turandot, would have won. Now in this 4th game, once again, first strike, I take the Raymary. Goes with a damage dealer pseudo sustain, right? Anybody on Amber is a pseudo sustain and more sustain. On my 2 and 3, I go with a much more neutral opener this time around, which is Senyu and Freya. Right, Freya is more of an initiator than an opener because she doesn't turn meter push enough, really, to actually open, unlike Turandot. But she does provide lots of useful buffs and debuffs for your team, whether it is cleave or CC. Right, so she's a much more neutral pick on 3, and she is good on 3 if your first 2 picks also allow you to pivot CC. Exactly what I did when he locked Tiamat on 3 instead of a cleanser. Right, because of her damage share and Amber, she is quite the sustain herself, so it's pretty committal to anti-cleave. And then he went Plume on 4 to counter my Freya. Plume pushes 8% every time you take a turn. Freya, skill 2 pushes 8. Senyu, skill 2 pushes 8. They basically cancel out. And so with these picks, he's very skewed towards anti-cleave and very weak to CC. Right, so that's what I do on 4-5. Right, I bring some utility, and then he brings another sustain, so he's very weak to this team, and I won. Now we go on to the hidden mystery slide, which is the friends we made along the way. No, so there's a couple things I wanted to talk about that I didn't think quite fit into any of the other slides. And so I figured I'd put that right at the end of this drafting section. It's some very important concepts to keep in mind for your draft, which is stay neutral, right, as neutral as you can, draft to counter, and understand the forced ban. What do I mean by neutral? Your first few picks ideally allow you to pivot to as many different team archetypes as possible near the end. So if you're going first, you want your first 3 to be neutral, and you wait for your opponent to commit on their ban protect slot. If you're going second, you want your first 2 picks to be neutral, and you wait for your opponent to commit on their ban protect. And then once they've committed to a certain playstyle, it's very hard to pivot later. And so you're able to counter whatever it is they're doing much more easily. Now, by that same token, if you remain neutral even onto your 3rd pick, it is very hard to counter you because you're able to pivot to whatever on your last 2. So neutral picks for the most part are characters that do a lot of different stuff. They're able to work in several different team comps. Right, so like Raymary is a perfect example. She's super tanky, does a lot of damage, has Amber. Right, she can be your damage dealer in a full CC team. She can be your bruiser in a turn 2 team. She can be backup damage in a cleave team. Right, she just works in like every team archetype for the most part. And so she's a very neutral first pick. Right, Senyu, lots of damage and a buff strip, so she can work in cleave and CC. That's remaining neutral. Drafting to counter. If your first pick, right, you just take whatever your strongest unit is on 1, and then second pick takes their 1-2. And for the most part, while remaining as neutral as you can on your 2nd and 3rd pick, but whatever it is they pick early, you want your next picks to counter those, right? And then they get 2 more picks, and then your next 2 picks should counter those. And so ideally, if you've drafted properly, your first 4 counter their first 4 really well. Or if you have a must ban like Fia, you ban that, and your first 4 ideally counter their remaining team. And then you're able to ban their last pick, who is, ideally for them, the strongest pick available against your team. All right, so let's say Fia was picked last and Sylph was picked here somehow. Then Fia would be a force ban for me with this team because she just kind of shuts it all down. This team would counter these 4, and then I would ban the last pick that's really strong. And that leads me on to the force ban. In many drafts, not all drafts, but a lot of them, there will be a character on the roster who, if you pick them on 4 or 5, your opponent has to ban them or they will lose. Oftentimes, Heinrich and Nahor are both force bans, sometimes even on the same draft, right? Like here, this team, I'm pretty sure, loses to both of them. So I picked them both, and didn't really matter which one he banned because they're both force bans, right? And so he lost. Ideally, in the draft, you don't want to leave yourself open to 2, right? Like 1 is bad enough already. So if you're drafting and you see your opponent is, really weak to just CC, or really weak to Heinrich just putting a bunch of debuffs, right? Like a lot of time you'll see with people who pick Awakened Sanya and Fushu, they have like very little to no cleanse, and Heinrich just does a world of good against teams like that, right? And sometimes a force ban is, maybe you've got Messiah locked on 3, and you pick an Amber Bayonton and they have no way to deal with Amber, and they just have to ban him. Sometimes it can be a Oyen, sometimes Tiamat is the force ban. A lot of times, though, it's Emilia and Raymary. So that's another one of the reasons why they're such strong early picks, is because against a lot of team setups, they're also force bans. So always keep an eye out for any character that you could pick in a specific draft that would be a force ban for your opponent, because those are the strongest picks. Because once again, your opponent has 2 options, and it's either ban that character or lose, right? And if you've been picking to counter, you want them to ban your force ban unit, because the rest of your team should counter the rest of their team even without this. That's the mystery slide. So with that all in mind, let's go over the big 3 cleave archetypes. First off, we've got the classic double pump. Now, your core units are going to be either Messiah or Lilium with Suki and Beonten. Beonten is always going to be there. Suki is really good with Messiah. Lily, I believe, is better with Lilium because Lilium gives herself an attack buff on her turn, so you don't need the buff from Suki. And Lily gives you an extra S3 with her skill 3 being able to reset the cooldown. So what you would do is you bring up your damage dealer with Suki, they hit their S3, does big damage, Beonten skill 2, bring them back up, reset their cooldown, they do it again. With the attack buff from Tsukiyomi, there is pretty much no team in the game that can tank a double Messiah S3. And then with the Lilium version, you would bring a defense debuffer and Lily, right? You would speed tune your Lilium with a 30% push from Lily's S2 to go right after your Nahor or Plume or whatever. With the defense debuff, her skill 3 pretty much one-shots everything. And then you can bring her back up and do it again, right? It's very strong. Bonus picks. Dorothy the Wisher is basically like a backup Suki. If your draft would be really weak if they banned the Suki, you can pick Dorothy the Wisher last because her skill 2 is a 100% turn meter push with a crit damage buff. You know, basically a Suki backup. Senyu. If your draft would be really weak if they banned Beonten, Senyu is kind of like Beonten. Assuming you have your Suki speed tuned faster than her, you pull up your Messiah, you hit the S3, and then because your Beonten is banned, you don't get to Messiah S3 a second time, but an attack buffed Senyu is close enough, right? You know, Messiah will do maybe 65-70% of their health bar, and then Senyu should be able to clean up with the rest. And she doesn't need a turn meter push because she's just fast enough. Heinrich and Nahor. Nahor can basically replace both of these, right? If he goes first and freezes their whole team, you don't need to boost your Messiah to the front. You can just put up your buffs with Beonten, or pull your Messiah up skill 3 and then skip their turn because they're frozen, and it's wonderful. Heinrich and Mio are both basically Amber counters. If you pick an early Heinrich, it makes it really easy to pivot CC off of that, and same with Mio, right? So they're both quite good. And then once again, Lily for the Lilium version. Next up, you've got CC Cleave, also quite strong. The core units are Nahor, right? Strongest CC in the game. Heinrich, very strong buff strip and Amber counter. Mio, he's like halfway between Nahor and Heinrich, right? She's pretty good CC, very good Amber counter. Gives your team the speed buff, which makes it much easier to keep your CC up on the enemy for longer. And then Lilium is the strongest damage dealer for CC Cleave because her skill 2 has CC on it as well, right? Which once again lets you keep them CC'd for longer. The bonus picks. Santic, very strong Amber counter. Deeding, he is going to be your Aya counter, right? You build him faster than your buff strips. You hit the S3 with tons of effect accuracy. He lands Torpor on everybody who isn't on Bulwark, and that allows you to debuff to your heart's content without anyone pushing to the front. Right, so if you see anybody on Reaper steps, Deeding is your man. Batsby is the Lilium replacement, basically. On a CC team, he does basically Messiah levels of damage. You don't need to keep them CC'd for long if they're all just dead, right? Batsby does very solid amount of damage. Fiamelia. Now, she doesn't CC at all, but is a very strong counter pick. You pick Fiamelia to steal her away from the turn 2 player and make it very difficult for them to counter CC. She also does fairly good damage herself. So on a CC team, especially if you also have Plume, right? Plume and Fia with like 2 CC units, that's plenty of damage to kill pretty much anything. And then Navette, right? She's a very solid backup CC unit. If the Heinrich is pre-banned, for instance, having the buff block as well as additional CC so you can keep them controlled for longer, very strong. Last but certainly not least, what I believe to be the quite possibly strongest cleave in the game right now, although many top players are using the Lilium cleave a lot more, I think speed cleave is also very good. Now, to make speed cleave work, you do need lots of good speed gear, right? You need your characters to have lots of pieces that are maybe not so achievable. So it is probably the hardest of the 3 cleaves to build, but it's also incredibly strong. So Freya, if you want turn 1, it's Freya. Senyu is probably the best damage dealer to pair with Freya because she just goes, right? You know, Freya goes, Senyu goes. It She does tons of damage. She one-shots other turn 1 players. So if you're speed battling and you put Freya on 3, Senyu goes really well with her because she'll just one-shot their whole team basically. And she's also a bit of a speed bridge to your slower, like 300 speed units as well. Turandot, best opener in the game. It just pushes your whole team to the front and you can pull off your entire combo and it's very strong. And Santic, he is most likely the best utility for the speed cleave setup. Because in speed cleave, your biggest weakness is turn meter cut. Right? It's your opponent cutting in between your turns and doing stuff to disrupt your combo. Right? You want your entire team to go first. Right? And debuffers like Heinrich trigger Reaper Steps, they trigger Strive, they trigger Lighthouse, all kinds of stuff that you don't really want your opponent to be able to do. Right? You want them to have as little counterplay as possible. And Santic helps a lot with that because instead of debuffing the enemy, he buffs your team, right? Which paired with the strongest opener in the game, that crit damage gets buffed even more, making your other 2 or even sometimes 3 damage dealers do significantly more damage. He buffs your team instead of debuffing the enemy, and he counters Amber by increasing the cooldown by a turn. He's very solid. Bonus picks, you've got Rin the Unbowed. With Senyu especially, she is very good against other turn 1 players or really anyone who isn't on Bloodbath. Think your Veronicas, your Fiamelias and whatnot, characters that a lot of the time people are building, triple HP right side and they put other sets that aren't Bloodbath. Right, she's pretty good against that. This entire row on Revelation, right? Revelation Plume, especially if you can get her speed tuned ahead of your Senyu, very strong. Right, I've seen quite a few people just one-shot entire teams with just these 2. Heinrich. Once again, you can never have too many Amber counters. Also, with that concept of neutrality in mind, right, he lets you pivot to a more CC composition instead. Yelly, you can build her very fast on Revelation and she still does quite good damage, especially if she lands the defense breaks, right? If she lands the defense down, it is so much damage. And then Slints, a Revelation Slints, especially if you have her skill 2 maxed, she can be a speed bridge with your Freya, right, giving you that extra buff, boosting your team up. With Slints and Senyu, you can get, I believe, even 285-ish speed units all the way to the front with your Freya passive, which is very strong. And then, shutting off Raymary passives, Fiamelia passives, all these really strong characters with their passives, shutting that off, very strong. Fiamelia, once again, very strong counter pick. If you take her, they can't have her. Very solid. And she also lets you tank a Raymary S3, right? Because you'll be able to heal it back up, right? So if you cleave the whole team and Raymary gets her S3 off before going Amber, a lot of the time you just lose because your team is at half health, and then Raymary comes out of Amber and gets to hit her S3 again, and you die. Another problem, Tiamat. If you do a bunch of damage to Tiamat and she goes Dragon Mode and pops out of Amber, right? She can do a lot of damage to your team, and then you're basically one bramble away from everyone dying. So Fia can help you a lot with survivability. Raymary, we already talked about. She's just the best first pick in the game. Loan, usually you're going to be building her at 300 plus speed, which makes her bridge with these 2. It makes her go with Turandot. And she's a good Amber counter as well. She locks down enemy Tiamats and very solid. And then Messiah. If you can get him 270 plus speed so that he combos with Turandot, he's just going to do the most damage. Right? He does so much damage. So those are the main 3 cleave archetypes. There's some other stuff that exists, but those are the strong ones. For the most part, you're going to want to speed tune your account to one of these main 3 archetypes. So, speed tuning. Let's talk about it. The basics of speed tuning are just, have your debuffers go first and then your damage dealers go next, right? It's, pretty simple. But if you want your cleave to function like a well-oiled machine, here's what you need to know. Step 1, find your target speed, right? This is going to be the speed of your opener. This is the speed that your DPS needs to get to cut ahead of all of the enemies. And basically, if your opener goes first, your damage dealer goes first. Next, determine the turn meter plus amount, which, with Lily as an example, her skill 2 puts Twin Trick, the ally gets 30% turn meter, and so Lily pushes 30%. Next, you calculate the speed required of your damage dealer, which is this calculation here, right? 100 minus the amount of turn meter push, and so here it's 30%, so you get 70. Right? Decimal 2 to the left, 0.7, then you multiply your target speed, which here is 348, by 0.7, right, or whatever the number is that you get from, whatever your turn meter push amount is, which here in this example is 243.6 speed. All right, we round up because rounding down can get dangerous. The game does do decimals for the most part, right? So if you're like 99.8% turn meter, the game will say 100, but it'll actually not be 100, and then somebody else who's also at 100 can still be ahead of you because they're at like 99.9 or whatever. So we always round up so that we have one extra speed just in case, and that will be the speed that your damage dealer needs to be to push off of the skill 2, more or less. So in this example, 244 speed would start you at 70% turn meter, assuming Lily is the fastest character in the match, which is just enough for this to push you to the front. However, if the enemy has Plume on their team, they'll get an 8% push after your Lily goes. So anyone on their team faster than 92% turn meter would push further than Lily's S2. All right, so if they're 93 and they get +8, they'll go ahead of whatever character you pushed with Lily's S2. All right, so to account for this, you can subtract the turn meter plus given by Plume, +1 for some wiggle room. I find there's a lot of sketchy stuff that happens when Plume's passive starts going off, right? So instead of 30%, you would just say it's a 21% push, and then you do this again, right? Which in this example, you would need, I think it's around 270 speed, somewhere around there, to be able to push past a Plume. Right, so like for instance, if you're trying to speed contest with Freya, and you want her to be able to ignore Plume, you can speed tune for that. You just have your other unit, your speed bridge, ideally on Bulwark to give you an extra 4%. And then you have them fast enough that with 12% push, they're able to get past 100. Some things to keep in mind, right? Count all turn meter plus or minus sources. So for instance, with Freya as your speed contest, right, you would count the 8% that you get from her 2 buffs on her skill 2, and then the 8% that you would get from Senyu's 2 buffs, and then 12% that you would get from Nymphoniel's 3 buffs, and right, just add them all up, as well as any cutting that the opponent might be able to do. So if you're only ever pairing a DPS, like I don't know, if you're Yeli, you're only ever pairing her up with Freya and Senyu, then you can count it as +16% for her speed tuning most of the time. Characters move between turns. This is a big one that will ruin a lot of your speed tuning, right? So like in this example with the perfect 30% push, a lot of the time it still is not enough, because even when you push a character to or past 100% turn meter, all of the other characters in the match like shuffle their turn meter a bit. I believe it depends on their speed, right? So the faster the character is, the more turn meter they'll gain between turns, but it's usually like 3 to 7%. I'll probably edit in an example here. You can see here, my guildmate starts at 83%. The opponent has their turn dot at 100. He pushes the whole team 30%, right? The Suki and Senyu are both at 100%. And watch this. The Chiaki goes from 83 to 92 between turns, even though the opponent pushed to 100. Right? And then the Suki pushes Messiah, and it happens again. And then even though Lighthouse and Gigabyte go off here, because the turn dot pushed Senyu so much, she's far enough past 100% that these two are not able to cut. And then from the other side, you can see, right, the Senyu pushed to 120% off of this 30% push, right? And even Messiah, right, he pushed 30%, right, from 61 to 91, and then between turns moved another 5%. So you need to keep that movement in mind for your speed tuning. I don't know what order the actions happen in, whose turn gets cut by who, or how any of these interactions work once you're already at 100%. I'm assuming you do still gain turn meter between turns, even if you're already at 100. And that's how the shuffling happens, right? Like sometimes you'll see multiple characters at 100 and they can like switch places. I'm assuming that's how that works, but that's really hard to tell. Right? But like you could see that. This little up arrow, I don't know if that means that they gained a buff or if that means they gained turn meter. But, I would assume that the Senyu is still gaining some turn meter between turns here. So she's probably at like 130+%. And that's why even though the Chiaki is pushing 25% with the Lighthouse, it's not enough to actually get past. So keep that in mind for your speed tuning. It's very important. Right? But that can mess up your speed tuning if somebody's... Right, like an example is I've had this happen many times. Your Freya is at 100% and they're at 99%, and your bridge is at 92%, and you Freya S2 and she pushes your team and it's still somehow not enough to cut. Yeah, that's because the character on the enemy team, they got some turn meter between turns. They got further ahead than the character you pushed, which is really annoying, but it works that way. The game loves rounding. 101% is better than 100. Sometimes it'll be 99.8, 99.7, whatever, and it will round up to 100, and it's not actually 100, and you can get cooked. So, if you're pushing 30%, ideally you would start at 71, not 70, and that will keep you safe. I think most people's first exposure to this is the 100% crit rate Hoyen that somehow misses the crit, and you're like, how in the world did that happen? Well, it's because it was like 99.8 crit rate, and it rounded up to 100. You rolled the 0.2% to miss. But the same thing applies to turn meter, I'm pretty sure. And this is probably the most important one to keep in mind. The turn meter does go past 100%. It'll say 100, but it actually, the game keeps your exact position in mind. So if you start at 70%, and then you Suki S3 and push 60% turn meter, it'll put you at 130. So even if somebody like cuts with Gigabyte from 85%, right? That 35% push, they still won't be able to cut ahead of you because that only brings them to 120 and you're at 130. So I'm not exactly sure on the rules on how this works because you can't observe the turn meter past 100, but it seems like for the most part you can push past 100% like once or twice. And it might be dependent on the turn meter push source as well. Sometimes it seems like Strive is able to push indefinitely. Or like every time you hit a Strive unit, they're able to push further. And sometimes like Plume's passive just like will not cut you no matter what if you pushed your whole team 30%. Not exactly sure how it works, but it does go past 100%. So that's why Turandot is so strong, because she makes it basically impossible for them to cut your team because she can push you all to like 120 plus, which is very good. So that's speed tuning. Now let's go over Amber, because this thing is basically a game mechanic in and of itself. So what does it do? Supposedly, right, when you're about to die, right, so 1 HP, and the last tick of damage is about to bring you to 0, applies death prevention, which just keeps them from dying, and halves the current turn meter. That's either bugged, because Amber is very buggy, always has been, or mistranslated. It doesn't half their turn meter, it pushes them all the way back. So minus 100, not minus 50. It recovers 60% of their max HP and removes all effects. So effects are debuffs, including yellow debuffs like Exaltation and Lilium's HP Destroy on the S3. But it heals first and then it has the cleanse. So if you have any effect on the enemy that prevents them from healing, right, like Exaltation, like Lilium's HP Destroy, like Wound, any of that, that will affect this heal before the buff is removed. Right, and then it puts them in Ice, which gives 200% defense, and it makes them immune to buffs, debuffs, and turn meter pushback. And then when the Ice is removed, it gives another 50% heal. And then last, but certainly not least, the skill cannot have its cooldown reduced. So reduced is this number decreasing. So after you die, it goes to a 6-turn cooldown, and there's no way to decrease that cooldown. All right, so like the Aya S3 should not reduce this cooldown, none of that. But Lily's S3, once you have that maxed, it doesn't reduce your cooldowns, it resets your cooldowns. So you can reset your Amber with a Lily skill 3 if she's twin-tricked on that ally. How do you counter Amber? Anything that has a cooldown increase, right? So cooldown reduce makes the cooldown go from 6 to 5. Cooldown increase makes it go from 0 to 1. So if you hit the Santic S2, you can increase the cooldown by 1 turn, and then this ability does not activate because it's still on cooldown, and they just die. Wound, right? Heinrich, like we said here, it heals first and then cleanses. So the wound will prevent them from healing. Get back to this later. Defense Ignorer. As you can see, there's 200% defense while they're iced. Messiah's skill 3 ignores 70% of defense, so they're not a whole lot tankier in the ice state than just normally against a Messiah S3. And it only heals 60%, so they'll be at half health already, basically. So a Messiah S3 a lot of the time can chop through ice state. All right, Lilium's HP Destroy on her skill 3. Right, it's got some special stuff against bosses, and then against other targets, right, so stuff that isn't bosses, destroy the target's max HP equal to 100% of the damage dealt. So if you one-shot somebody, the death prevention kicks in because they're at 1 health, and they were about to take that last 1 HP and die, but then their health bar is completely locked, and they're not able to heal before Amber cleanses off that destroyed HP. And so then sheer damage, if you're able to one-shot the Amber unit in your initial opening volley, they only heal for 60% in ice. Tiamat heals for more because of her bloodshed passive. It gives her more healing the more stacks she has. Right, so a lot of the time she can heal for like 70 or 80% off of this. But most of the time they'll be 60% roughly health after the Amber goes off. And so if you can just do enough damage to just kill them again, that's another way to counter Amber, which with Speed Cleave, right, with Turn Dot, you have 3 damage dealers on your team. Oftentimes that is enough damage to just double kill, right? So in a way, you can bring, enough damage dealers is utility in a way, because you're able to kill through Ambers because you just have that much damage. Revelation, for instance, doesn't care about your defense, right? It just does true damage equal to whatever percent of the Revelation character's attack minus this protection field buff, right? Take less damage in PvP, and it decreases as the turns go on, and then you end up actually taking more damage. But if you're cleaving on the first turn, like, that's not gonna apply. Yeah, Revelation does true damage, so even in the iced state, you can just do tons of damage with your Revelation units as well. So with all of that in mind, let's do some example drafts real quick, and then hopefully wrap this thing up. So we got the first pick, second pick. In chess, white goes first, black goes second. So we got our picks here. And we're assuming this is a turn 2 player, right? And we're the cleaves, so we got our guys, their guys, bans, pre-bans, all that stuff. So as first pick, if you're just cleaving, Tiamat is a pretty solid pre-ban. The only thing I don't really like about it is it really heavily telegraphs that I'm trying to cleave you, so I don't want to deal with Tiamat. Most of the time, only cleavers pre-ban the Tiamat. So I like to go with a more neutral pick with either Slintz or Veronica or Doki even, right? Doki just to keep the CC path open. If you're first pick, you're pretty much always taking Raymary, and then they're pretty much always taking Fia Loan or Fia Fushu or something. And so they'll be able to lock Doki on 3. So if you pre-ban the Doki, you don't need to worry about that. And then you can, just ban the Fia and go CC. But I like Slintz pre-ban. But let's just say you pre-banned Tiamat and they go with the Mio. I see the Mio pre-ban a lot. I think the 3 most common are Mio, Turandot, and Nahor from turn 2 players. So if any of these 3 are pre-banned, you can probably guess it's turn 2 just from that. Right, but anyway, so we're first pick, we take the Raymary. Say they take low on Fia. And if you're cleaving, especially if you're CC cleaving, this is pretty much a force ban, right? Like basically, in fact, like it's to the point where if you're going first, it might even be worth pre-banning her. Just because, if you take the Raymary, there's nothing really that turn 2 has that's more disruptive than Fia. So having her pre-banned might be better, but I like leaving it open because if they pick anything else here, then you can take her on your next picks as well. And if it's a turn 1 player, then you're able to draft your bruiser stuff. But anyway, so if they pick like this is pretty much already a pre-ban. So you got to think, what are they putting on 3, and how do I counter low on? So usually very solid is just Senyu on 2, and then depending on who you're fighting against, it's usually either Freya or Turandot on 3. Sometimes Heinrich makes more sense. I just kind of have to feel it out, go with your gut. But I like Turandot. We'll say that's what we're getting on 2 and 3. Alright, and then maybe they go Awakened Sanya on 3, and then maybe a Amber Plume on 4. So in this case, right, you are pretty much already just guaranteed to ban this. You have turn dot, so you're not too concerned about Plume's turn meter push. And ideally, you want to just nuke down the Sanya before she gets her turn. So here, there's a couple options, but typically I would just go full damage. A draft like this with the fast Messiah and the fast Yelly is usually very strong against pretty much whatever they pick here. And let's say they go with like the Chiaki or whatever. Doesn't really matter because turn dot is busted. Alright, so you would ban this, they would ban probably Messiah. That would be these two teams against each other. Maybe they ban the Raymary, but that's just not... Like, this team beats this team 99 out of 100 times. Alright, Messiah is just way too much damage to leave on the board. Alright, but let's say instead of pre-banning the Tiamat, you pre-ban Doki or something, right? And they pick the Tiamat on 3 with Awakened Sanya, or, well, they'd probably go with Fushu here. This is where the Heinrich Nahor is really good, right? Because you're banning this. These are really bad against CC. Doki is already out. I could go with, like, one of these 3 as their backup cleanse. I think generally Sylph is pretty good. On Alicorn, it's pretty easy for her to break out of debuffs. Alright, so you have to ban this, and then they probably ban one of these 2. Right, if it's either of these 2, you just win. Having Heinrich and Nahor with a boost and then one of the damage dealers is very strong against something like this. I believe the ban here is Heinrich, right, with Sylph and 2 Ambers and a Bulwark Fushu. Nahor is a lot less scary than Heinrich. Or if you ban the Nahor here instead and leave the Heinrich, this is still very scary, right? Because it's basically just, if this Raymary with the turn dot boost is faster than the Sylph, you just lose on the spot, right? Because the turn dot pushes, Aya goes, gets everyone to, like, I don't know, half health, Heinrich puts the heal block, and then Raymary double taps the S3, and everyone dies. So, right, this is a big gamble. Right, this, not so much. Right, this team has, I mean, it's just Raymary's S1 to deal with Ambers, and you can only get rid of 1. And then Sylph cleanses with the Alicorn, you've only got 3 debuffs, which you can heal everybody back up, and it's chilling. And so let's say they're first pick. And you pre-ban the Raymary, because she's not fun to deal with. And they pre-ban the Turandot. This is a fairly common one I've been seeing from higher rank turn 2 players. Yeah, Turandot pre-ban. And they first pick Fia. You always go low on, usually. And then Senyu is pretty much just always good second pick. Sometimes, not so much, but especially with Turandot pre-banned, Senyu goes really well with Freya, and you're probably going to want to put Freya on 3 more often than not if the turn dot is pre-banned. So they go with these 2, and then these 2, because that's just how the draft shakes out. And here's where you've got the decision to make. Are we going with Heinrich, or are we going with speed? Basically just, are your spidey senses tingling? Do you think they have a Doki? Because if they go Doki here with a Heinrich on 3, and you've got 2 cleanse alls to deal with, like, you just lose, basically. So here it's basically just, do you think they have a fast Doki or not? The answer is no, then Heinrich Nahor is really good here. Right, against this. Right, let's just say they don't have a Doki, because what are they going to put here? Aya and what? Santic? Then you can just go with Mio, right, or even Navet. And you just take 2 CCs, ban this. Or, right, they go Aya, Santic, you can just bring more damage, right, because these 2 should be fairly squishy, because they're on like double or triple effect res, or like 1 effect res and 2 effect accuracy or something. So, and then you ban this, they ban, I don't know, this. Honestly, with this, it's probably the low on ban, because low on can still lock down Tiamat on her own. Right, and this team should beat this team more or less. And then for the turn 1 mirror match, I probably should have mentioned this in the part 1 of this series about counterpicking, but I thought it was pretty obvious and didn't need to be discussed, but I definitely should have thrown it in there somewhere. So it's a turn 1 draft, and you know your opponent's turn 1. And so basically you've got like these main 5 speed contesters, right? These are the characters that maybe Suki's like a distant 5th, that most people are going to have all their speed, like all their best speed on. These are their the openers. If you're fighting somebody else who is a turn 1 player, and they first pick, let's say you pre-ban the Raymary because you're going first. Maybe they got rid of Tiamat, making it real obvious that they're cleaving, and they first pick like a Revelation Plume. You quite simply just take the Freya and Turandot on 1 and 2, right, if you're going second. And now they have no way to speed contest you, right? If they go, I don't know, like Mio on 3 and ban one of these, your Turandot should be faster than their Mio. Your Freya should be faster than their entire account, and you win the speed contest. And then if you are first pick, right, instead of making it obvious with like a Revelation Plume, you go with Fia or Loan or something. And then if they try and do this, now you can take like your anti-turn 1 stuff. And then of course, if they don't try and do this, if they go with like, I don't know, like Plume and Loan, now you can just hit them with the Senu Freya, and now they also have lost turn 1. Right, you're banning this because it counters Freya unless you have her skill 2 leveled. You're able to get 3 buffs instead of 2 from her skill 2. And then if they put like Mio or Turandot on 3, you just bring a speed bridge, right? Somebody that you can push up with Freya if they ban your Senu. And then a fast damage dealer of some sort. And there's just no way that they outspeed you and you win. Somebody makes it obvious that they are a turn 1 player. It's pretty easy to fight them for the most part. Because if you're going second, you just take both speed contests. If you're going first, you just put your Freya on 3, and there's no way they can outspeed you. Right? Because if they take both speed contests on 1 and 2, you just do your anti-turn 2 stuff. You go Hoyan, Messiah, Amber, Bayonta, and all that stuff. And I talked about in part 1. And then if they don't take both, you just put Freya on 3, and they can't outspeed you. So it's already like it's pretty hard to fight the turn 1 mirror when you're not fast, right? Because basically all you have is Freya on 3 or your like defensive anti-cleave stuff, right? But if you're fast, you can just pick both of these, and there's nothing they can do, right? And it's really important if you do open like this against a turn 1 player, you have to have a fast Heinrich, because a lot of the time when you take both of the speed contests early, they'll just like throw this in here. And now you need to deal with the Amber Bayonton yourself. So you need like Heinrich and Mio and stuff so that you can pivot CC, right? Because these two plus Heinrich and 1 CC is usually enough to like kill any turn 1 team, right? Like these two just cycle ridiculously fast. They take so many turns together, right? Because of all the buffs and all the pushback and all the just the base speed that they have and Jackal Guard and everything. Like they just take so many turns. So Heinrich to strip any buffs. And then any CC basically, but especially especially Freeze, right? Freeze is really good. And for the most part, like you just ban this, right? They ban this maybe. And this team beats this team like 9 out of 10 times. So that's something to keep in mind for the turn 1 mirror. And I think that's basically kind of the flow chart for this season. But yeah, like if you're cleaving, these are like the most important characters to have built. Right, 555, 511, just max her skills. She's purple. 555, 155, 545, 114. Nahor works fine at 424, 433, 455, 455. Right, if you got all these and you've got good speed gear, you can cleave pretty much anybody. Like all the rest is just extra for the most part. Yeah, so I'll probably do like a build priority list sometime soon, going over like if you're new to turn 1, what characters you should build first and what their skills need to be, and then maybe also like a hopefully quick account review as to like go over what characters I have built and why, and like what my speed tuning is and stuff. Go over passives and whatnot, what sets to use on people, that kind of stuff. But that's for later. Right now, I'm mostly just trying to give out the important info needed to cleave people. Right. So just keep in mind, if your account isn't fully stacked, just try and counter pick whenever you can. Right. If you know that your opponent has a specific character really well built, you can just steal it for yourself. All right. Like a lot of the time against turn 1 players, I'll like take their Mio or something so that they don't have a bridge with Freya, and it can work out. I think I've gotten like all the basics down in this video. Most of the rest of what I have is just like match to match nuances that you'll only learn after playing hundreds and hundreds of games to learn like like if Linglo is on Gigabyte, it's gonna have Bulwark, right? There's gonna be forced 3 Bulwark modules, 3 Bloodbath on a Gigabyte Linglo. If Sylph or Doki are on Alicorn, it's always going to be a Strive, right? Loan, if she starts at like 80 5+ turn meter, she's on Swift Rush Bloodbath. If she starts at like 70 something, it's Strive Bloodbath, right? Like this, all kinds of stuff that you'll learn game by game that I can't include everything here in this video. So you'll have to learn that on your own, right? But it should be a less painful learning experience if you're able to apply all the stuff I talked about here to your account before you go into RTA. And hopefully you're all able to hit Mythic and get your lattice and maybe even push for the leaderboard. I'll have part 3 out, probably not before the season is over, honestly. I haven't really played enough games standard to where I think I have a good enough understanding of the draft to actually make a guide on it. But you know, for the most part, it's just you know, build your Tiamat, your Raymary, Loan, Fia. You know, pick 2 or 3 of them, and you know, only ever pick into turn 1 players, right? If it's like you don't want to opt into the turn 2 mirror if you're mostly a cleave player, right? Because you don't have all of the like the little tech picks built. But yeah, so you know, more in-depth guide on that coming once I've got some more games under my belt, and that one should be probably shorter than this one. If you found any value in this video, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll see you next time.